Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. So today I want to talk some more about oil stones, okay, oil sharpening stones. Not only, your naturals, like your soft and black Arkansas stones, natural stones, but also your Norton crystalline coarse fine and your Norton fine and coarse India stones. So all these are lumped underneath the category of oil stones, man-made oil stones and natural oil stones. Okay, so yeah, I would class those with oil stones, and then you've got diamonds, and then you've got water stones, and then you got your ceramics, which I've never really played around with a whole lot. But so today it's going to be mostly about oil stones. We'll bring in some diamonds and some water stones just to kind of help explain some things. Okay, so you guys know that I really like the Norton crystalline coarse fine combination stone, right? Okay, I've got these in 6-inch stones all the way up to the jumbos, which are like a foot long and 1.5 inches thick, something like that. It's really, really tough to beat these stones as a general purpose type stone, okay? And these stones right here are also soft enough that they will release grit at the normal sharpening pressures that you would use on your typical knives, which would expose new grit. Okay, the India stones, the binder that holds the the grains in these stones together, the binder that they use in these stones right here is a much it's a much tougher binder, I would guess. So these stones do not release grit as much as the crystalline stones do, okay? So these stones are much more likely to stay flat for a longer period of time, but they tend to dull and glaze over a lot quicker than the crystalline stones. Take that a step farther, your natural stones, like this Dan's soft hard combination, they are harder still than the Norton fine Indias. So it's pretty tough to get these stones to dish, but the problem that you run into with these is that they tend to clog up and they tend to dull much faster than either of the other two because they're not releasing fresh grit underneath. Okay, now, what am I talking about when I say dull and glaze over and release fresh grit? Okay, so I think that is where I'm kind of running into some problems explaining to folks, how these sharpening stones work. Okay, so I would say most everybody has used sandpaper at one time or another in their entire lives, right? Especially if you're, looking up sharpening videos on YouTube. If you're trying to sharpen your knife, more than likely you've got a knife. You're probably a handy type person. Which means that you've used a knife for something, construction, repair, something or other. So more than likely you've used sandpaper at one time or another. Okay, so sandpaper. This right here is a piece of Norton. You guys know I love Norton. 60 grit. They call that a coarse. I can't remember what this is, what kind of sandpaper this is. And I guess it really doesn't matter. So this sandpaper right here looks nice and flat, right? If you take the sandpaper and you put it up underneath a microscope, okay, what you're going to see is something that looks like a landscape, okay, like a mountain range, where you've got mountains and peaks of mountains and you've got valleys in between the mountains and everything, all right? So, and it's the peaks of the mountains that are doing the sanding or the abrading of whatever it is you're sanding, whether it be wood or metal or whatever, right? So, and anything as you use it will get dull eventually. A knife is really sharp. You can take a knife that's, really hard steel and cut cardboard, which is really soft, and sooner or later that cardboard will end up dulling the knife, okay? Well, it's the same way with sandpaper or sharpening stones, okay? This might be made out of ceramic, okay? Little bitty ceramic mountains inside the sandpaper. Well, you keep sanding with it, eventually they're going to get dull. Okay, so sandpaper dulls in 3 different ways, or quits working in 3 different ways. All right, so the first and probably the most common way, depends on what you're working on again, is loading or clogging. Okay, so this right here is one of my hand sanding sticks. All it is a piece of 1 inch wide by 1/8 inch thick, I don't know, 8 inch long piece of, I think it's 440C stainless. Okay, and I just take half sheets of sandpaper and roll them up on there, and then I can hand sand knife blades or handles or whatever, right? Well, if you look at this particular piece, the last thing I was sanding with this one was I was hand sanding a Cocobolo handle on a paring knife. Okay, you see all this trash that's up in there? Okay, that's Cocobolo. All right, Cocobolo is very oily and it tends to clog up sandpaper really fast, right? Now this is Cocobolo on 220 grit sandpaper, right? But the steel and the grit and the you know, what all the trash that's on the edge of your knife. So let's say you were butchering a hog, right? Okay, well your knife edge is going to have you know, fat from the pig, you know, inside the scratches on the edge. Okay, well if you don't clean it off, that is going to get transferred into your sharpening stone and clog it. Bits and pieces of the steel that's coming off of your knife blade will clog the stone. All right, now once that happens, now that sandpaper can't work anymore because there's you know, it's clogged up. I mean, all the stuff is filling the valleys in between the peaks of the mountains, and now they can't scratch the surface of the steel as efficiently. Okay, the other 2 ways that sandpaper dull is one from just stripping the stones right out of the paper. Okay, you know, all this is a whole bunch of little bitty sharp grains of ceramic, I think in this case, that are, you know, glued to a sheet of paper. Well, if you put too much pressure, or if you know, use too much of an angle on whatever it is that you're sanding, you know, you'll strip them grains right off the paper. Well, once the grains are off the paper, now you can rub on the paper all day long if you want to. Ain't nothing going to happen because there's no grains there to do any sharpening. The third way, okay, so let's back up a second. So the clogging, you can fix that to a really big extent by the lubricant that you use on your stone. So I use mineral oil for the most part. A lot of times people use Dawn dishwashing detergent, straight up or with some water. I've heard folks using WD-40, kerosene, you know, all kind of stuff like that. And if your stone is clogged, you can wash the stone basically with Dawn or with WD-40 or some sort of a solvent, and you know, a stiff brush, steel wool, an old toothbrush, something like that, to kind of get down in there and clean that, whatever's clogging the pores of the stone, to clean that out. And the stone will go back to cutting pretty well, but not as aggressively as it could. Okay, the stripping of the particles out with sandpaper, that's a real big problem. With diamond stones like these, that's a real big problem, because all this is a sheet of steel with diamonds glued to the surface. So on diamonds, if you strip them diamonds away, now you've just got the steel underneath. You can rub on that for 3 or 4 days and you're not going to sharpen your knife. There's nothing there to do the abrading. With oil stones, you strip some of the top layer of particles off, and you expose fresh particles underneath it, and now it actually helps. But generally speaking, if you're doing that with a knife edge, you're putting way too much pressure on your knife edge to be sharpening it. Okay, so that's where, like, resurfacing this with, you know, the corner of an old file would work pretty good. Okay, so the last thing, and this is something that I went out into the yard and picked up some rocks to kind of help show you about, and I hope it makes it a little bit clearer. So remember me talking about if you take this piece of sandpaper and you put it up underneath, you know, like my stereoscope, and you look at it at magnification, it looks like a mountain range, right? Okay, so what I did is I went out into the yard and I grabbed a pile of rocks, 2 piles of rocks, okay? Now granted, these aren't all the same size and everything like they would be, you know, in like a man-made stone or a nice natural stone, okay? But I hope you're going to get the picture here. All right, these stones right here have all got really nice sharp corners on them, okay? I'm not sure what kind of rocks they are, but it'd be kind of like shale on a landslide or something. You know, I mean, you've got all these sharp edges and points and stuff on these rocks, okay? So this is what, you know, it'd be a good representation of what a fresh piece of sandpaper or a freshly cut and lapped oil stone or a fresh diamond stone would look like. It would look like this, with all these nice sharp edges, sharp points. You know, they look very abrasive because they are. I mean, all these little sharp corners and points are going to cut the steel of your knife blade very, very efficiently. Very efficiently with very little pressure, okay? Now, you start off your stone like this, all right? So let's say it is a freshly lapped soft Arkansas stone, all right? Now, over time, as you sharpen, you know, 5, 10, 20, 50, 200 knives, all these sharp corners are going to get abraded by the steel, okay? They're going to get dull. Once that happens, they turn into this, okay? No sharp corners anymore. Now there's nothing in this pile of rocks here that's going to cut very efficiently at all. And what that's going to end up looking like would be a soft Arkansas stone like this that I just picked up at the flea market the other day, okay? If I run my finger across this, I can feel the texture is sharp, all right? This is going to cut steel efficiently. This stone, I don't believe it's been lapped since it left the factory. And it's got, you probably won't be able to see it without the magnifying lens. You know what? Here's an idea. You know, I've got that really cool, I should be up here for a second. I've got that really cool lens for the GoPro there. That lets you see smaller stuff. I wonder if we can shoot through a magnifying glass. And of course, remember, I'm shooting this through I'm looking through a little bitty screen that's about 1.5 inches, about an inch and a half tall and 2 inches wide. So we'll have to see how this looks on the big screen, but you should be able to see all the you know, the loading of this stone. You know, there's going to be metal particles in there, you know, grease and fat from a pocket knife or you know, whatever, and then also the particles of the stones, you know, the grains, instead of looking nice and sharp like this, they're dull like that, okay? So on this type of stone, your oil stones, the only way to get rid of all that, I mean, sure, you can clean the gunk in between the grains, but then you've got a nice clean, you've got grains that are nice and clean, but they're all rounded off and dull, okay? So the only way to get these stones back to cutting the way they could cut is to lap them, all right? Now, I do have, like I said, my first video that I shot on how to refresh these stones. I took a corner of an old file and yes, it does wreck the file, and it doesn't keep everything as flat as what you might hope to. All right, but I just saw a stone today, one of these. Guy came over to the house, friend I'd never met, to learn how to sharpen a knife, and his stone was about half this length, so about like that, and it was half the thickness in the middle as it was on the ends. Okay, so if you got a stone like that, you know, and you take a file and you knock down the ends and you make the whole stone to where it's within 1/8 of an inch, you know, you're doing a lot of good. Plus, you're cutting fresh surfaces that'll cut your knife steel real quick. Anyway, so you can cut them with a file, you know, and dig those dull particles off the top of the surface. You can cut them, relap them with silicon carbide powder. You know, loose silicon carbide powder you get off Amazon, and a piece of plate glass, or, you know, a granite tile or something like that. I've seen guys doing it on sandpaper. Seems to me like I've tried that, and all it did was load the sandpaper up, and then the sandpaper loaded the stone, and the stone loaded the sandpaper, and in the end, neither one of them was any good anymore. But, you know, all my stones are in pretty good shape. I bought what looks like a really nice used one off eBay yesterday that's got a nice, you know, big divot in the middle. And then I've got another auction that is supposed to end this afternoon that it looks like I'll probably win. That's got 2 or 3 more stones, and I think another friend has got one that's really worn out. So I'm going to get those into the shop and play with them with, you know, maybe just regular old sand on a cinder block or something, and just try some different things to see, you know, if you have to have silicon carbide powder, you know, to be able to flatten them and to make them cut the way they're supposed to. Where else am I looking for here? Oh, that's right, I made notes on this one. We got the clogging of the stones and the sandpaper, ripping out of the particles, dulling these, which we use the rocks. Oh, so here was, okay, so when you're first learning how to sharpen, okay, do yourself a favor and grab a new one of these Norton crystalline coarse fine combination stones. They're the ones that, well, this one came in this real nice box. It says IB8 on the end of it. Crystalline combination bench stone, okay? There's nothing worse than trying to work with a dull tool, okay? So if you were to try to, especially a beginner, okay, because beginners are likely to have, like, let's say working on kitchen knives, right? They're likely to have a drawer full of these, okay? These are just, you know, flea market knives that I picked up. This one in particular, picked up for $3. It says Mundial steak knife. You know, I have no idea if it's a good kitchen knife or not. I picked it up because I found, you know, I kind of like the shape of the handle, and I was going to play with that design. Okay, this knife has not seen a stone since it left the factory, and it might not have seen a stone at the factory. It's got some scratches on here, like if somebody used like one of them pull-through knife sharpeners with, or maybe a kitchen steel or something, right? And it has got an edge. I mean, there's no edge there at all. Okay, you try sharpening this with an old beat-up soft hard Arkansas stone that hasn't been lapped, you're going to be there for days, okay? And the last thing you need as a beginner is something that's going to wear you out before you do anything, all right? I mean, this combination right here would be like trying to cut through, you know, a piece of pipe with a dull hacksaw blade. You're going to be there for a long, long time. And it's really tough to keep good form and good technique when you're tired, okay? So you want something that's going to cut, and cut aggressively and quickly, okay? So on a stone like this, you know, even as dull as this knife blade is, this would take me at the most maybe 7 or 8 minutes, something like that, to sharpen this. Well, in 7 or 8 minutes, you can really focus on, you know, the amount of pressure you're using, nice smooth strokes at the proper angle, okay, both ways. Really focus on keeping that angle right, your pressure right, and making sure you're hitting the entire edge, okay. For 7 minutes, anybody can do that. If you're on something like this where it's going to take you, you know, an hour or maybe days, you know, at some point you're going to get tired. When you get tired, your form's going to fall all apart. You won't be holding the same angle. You'll start putting way too much pressure. You might start putting too much pressure or going too fast, and the knife slips, comes off the end, and slices your finger up. You know, that can be a bad deal. I mean, sharp tools are so much safer than dull ones, and that is the same with sharpening stones. Let's see. You know, I think that's probably good enough for this video. So what we did was we took we compared oil stones, man-made oil stones and natural oil stones. We compared them to sandpaper, okay, fresh, nice sandpaper that's got real sharp particles in it. Dull sandpaper that's been, your grains have been worn down, some of them ripped out, and, you know, the pores in between the paper clogged up. We used the lawn rocks to kind of explain the difference between sharp grains on the top of a freshly lapped stone versus dull grains on a stone that hasn't been lapped or refreshed for a long time. Talked about the difference between cleaning out the pores of your stones with WD-40 or mineral oil or Dawn dishwashing detergent and a soft brush or a wire brush or steel wool versus actually recutting the face of that stone with silicon carbide. Talked about how nice it is sharpening on a freshly lapped stone versus one that's, you know, hasn't been lapped in forever, and how using a fresh stone that's in good shape with a freshly lapped surface is much easier to learn on than one that is dull and isn't really cutting very much. I think that's probably going to be enough for the video. If you have any questions, or if I made it clear as mud, you know, let me know in the comments below. And you know, I really hope that kind of helps you understand what's going on with the surface of your oil stones. I think once you kind of, that part kind of clicks, then you learn how to maintain your stones. And I've got a video on how to lap them with a silicon carbide. And when these new old stones come in, I'll probably make a couple of videos on what I found worked and what I found didn't work, you know, on lapping and conditioning them, because I think that's going to be a real interesting line of study for a little bit. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Again, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time.